many of you, probably it's welcome back, and hopefully welcome back several times that you've been back here. I'm Nick Fisicelli. I'm the president and CEO of Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park. We are the park's nonprofit partner in science and learning, and together we co-lead this research learning center. And so our work, our efforts are focused on understanding the consequences of environmental change and then engaging learners of all ages in the science and solutions. And the work here we get to do builds on a long history, a long legacy of success in science and conservation here in Acadia, work that goes back about 140 years or so. And so it's really a privilege to be able to build upon this legacy here, and to do so through the wonderful support of people, philanthropic partners that really are working with us to create a better future for parks, people, and the planet. And in addition to this legacy of science and conservation, there's a fascinating history and legacy of this campus. And many of you, I think, are part of that history and legacy here of this special place. This place that now I have the great fortune to come here to work every day. And many of you probably did so in the past. And there's lots of history here that I only know the tiniest little bits, and so it's always fun for me to speak with former Navy personnel who were here on this base. And so thank you all. Those of you who did get to serve here, thank you for your service. Thanks for being part of the history, the legacy, and also part of the community here on the Schoodic Peninsula. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Jim Guest, who was the most recent commanding officer on the base here, to tell us more about the history. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks. I'm going to try this without a mic. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. If I knew the mic, I'll get lost and start telling jokes and stuff. Well, I'll do that anyway. So I am Jim Guest. I'm with the XO. Is Mike down here yet? It's XO for Mike Rogers. And then for Ed Williamson. And then Ed's son was in a horrific car crash on September 8th of 2001. And I became acting CO that day, Gilbert. And then I stayed active until I took over the base the first week in January. Can't hear me? Of course. All right.
I think it is. Just makes it.
Yes. No. Funny story. I was a radioman when I first joined the Navy, and I was teaching a leadership class called LMT. Some of you might remember it. And I was talking on the radio and the microphone, and when the OSs came up to me and said, "We never let our radiomen talk on microphones." Fortunately, I was a submarine radioman, so we didn't have OSs, so it worked out well. Anyway, I said I was the CO for the last 6 months that I was here. And this is the best place we ever were stationed. Just first off, how many people military service in the audience? Raise your hand. How many people are stationed here at Winter Harbor? For those of you without the military service, we really appreciate you coming to listen to the lecture, but I will point out that the people that raised their hands, they won the Cold War. We had a cadre of the military in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s nobody better in the world. We did some awesome things, and I said that this is not, you will not find a better group of patriots anywhere else in the world. So it really, when you talk about freedom isn't free, it's people like this, you know, 2 and 80-watt schedules, and deploying in short notice, and flying in airplanes and submarines, and cigar boxes loaded in the back of destroyers. It did good. It was a pleasure to have served with everyone. Anyway. The reason I wrote the brief is because this is the most unusual military story that I have ever heard of. And it all started with a guy named Alessandro Fabri, who lived out in Bar Harbor during the summer. He grew up in New York. But he's a rich kid. His father and his uncle were part of J.P. Morgan's inner circle and initial investors when J.P. Morgan became, you know, the billionaire. And the Fabri family rode those coattails of their own. They had a couple other businesses themselves. Alessandro was the son. Again, did really well. Sandro's dad died in 1893. And his uncle kind of took him under his wing, and that's that. He's not quite a poor little rich kid, but close. He got the radio bug. He would talk better on the mic than I do. So he was one of the first ham radios in existence. I mean, he started this just maybe 6-7 years after, you know, Marconi did the first transatlantic transmission. So he really liked it, but he built a radio receiver at his summer cottage. I think it was a 10-bedroom house on Desert Island. And it was wonderful. It was interesting. He actually was friends with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and was telling him about this radio station and then hearing the Germans and other things, and I said, wow. This is when Roosevelt was Deputy Secretary of the Navy, and he's going, I don't think our people are getting that. So anyway, it kind of piqued his interest. Well, he really wanted to be in the Navy. He thought it was cool. And you got to admit, the uniforms were pretty neat. So he had, like, I think it was a 142-foot sloop that he wanted to donate to the Navy if the Navy would commission him and let it be the commanding officer of the sloop, and he knew patrols up and down the New York to Maine coast. And the Navy said, yeah, you can give us the ship, but we don't need you. So he goes, okay. So, something else. Well, anyway, again, Roosevelt, connections between them, and Roosevelt had his place up in Campobello Island. Anyway, they had connections, so he started talking with them, and he offered to build the Navy a radio station at a place called Otter Cliffs. If you go there today, there's a memorial marker to Alessandro Fabri. He built the radio station and then told the Navy, if you make me an ensign, I'll let you have a radio station. And this time they were interested, and they did. So in 1916 or 1917, they finished it up. They made him the OIC, commissioned him as an ensign, and he ran the radio station through the end of World War I. But what was unique is the radio reception from Otter Cliffs was literally better than any other radio station on the East Coast. The clarity of the signal that they were able to pull in was tremendous. And it was of real value to the Navy. So they both reception, and it also was an HFDF site. Well, Fabri turns it over. He resigns his commission, he makes it to lieutenant, Scientist Commission, and then goes on, and actually, he died shortly after, 1930 or 29, 30, pneumonia. He was 43 years old when he passed. One of his other things, he's actually on the forefront of video, filming cell division. So they developed a camera that was that accurate that they could go down and photograph cells dividing. Again, back in 1910, 1911. So again, just a brilliant person. And then the Navy kept the base going. Well, this is where it gets interesting. Not that that isn't interesting. I mean, how many people go, well, I'll build your base if you make me a naval officer? John D. Rockefeller decided that he was going to develop Acadia. I mean, Lafayette National Park, as it started out, was there, but he decided, he was another summer resident, he was going to spruce it up and plow all this money into Acadia. So he starts building his loop road. Guess where the loop road wanted to go? Through Otter Cliffs Radio Station. The Depression, not a lot of money. The base was kind of worn around the edges, and he kind of says, hey, Navy, tear down this eyesore and let us build our park. And the Navy says, this is the best radio station on the East Coast. No. Well, John D. Rockefeller had a lot of friends because he was rich, and he had inherited all of his dad's politicians. His dad, no. But anyway, they worked out a deal that if they could find another place with a similar radio reception, and somebody covered the expense of relocating the Otter Cliffs radio station, the Navy would agree. And that's how we ended up here. In fact, Rockefeller anonymously funded a radio receiving study. We came up with, right here, the Schoodic Peninsula was, again, very similar to Otter Cliffs, and was an excellent place to receive radio signals. So basically, Rockefeller got Congress, I forget, $235,000 back in 1932, 33. But the money to build the base was put into the national park budget, because for those of us who have been in the Navy, there's no way the Navy would have built this base. Well, some of the old pictures you'll see when the Navy was here to begin with, they put up quonset huts and stuff like that. They did not build beam steel interior cypress, frame buildings like the Rockefeller. So anyway, they used Gross Further Atterbury, who also designed all the gatehouses and all the big, park structures, and he designed what we call the Rockefeller building. And they started construction in 1933. This was actually part of Acadia National Park, even back then. The Moore family had donated it to the park in the early 1900s. So they were able to get the park to agree to transfer it over here. And they started construction in 1933, and they finished it, and the base opened up in 1935. So there's a generator house behind the Rockefeller building, the Rockefeller building. I think that's all that's left of the actual 1935 building. And I said, there's a list of the building, I won't read it to you, but the Rockefeller building, if you're facing it from the front, you look to the left, that whole far left wing wasn't apartments at the time. That was the operations. There's a door that's actually been blocked off for a while. That was the entrance into the radio room and the operations center, and back in that. And then they eventually built up by where people were here would go as the chapel. chapel, which is one of the educational centers up here. They eventually moved the ops building up there when it got a little bit too big for the small spaces in the Rockefeller building. Again, they were able there was somewhat of a road out here at the time. They were able to improve upon it. They said, talked about the Rockefeller funding it. The $250,000 they get a intermittent brief. And then initially it was 26 acres. And then I think we went to like 126 and came back we had 100 acres of Schoodic when we closed the base in 2002. Which I always refer to as like Winnie the Pooh in the 100-acre woods. It was as close to a fairy tale as it could have been. And then Chief Max Gunn was in charge. He actually had been stationed out at Otter Cliffs. He had a couple of iterations here at the base, like many of people in the audience did too. He said 2.5-story H block, chateau-esque structure. He said the garages, basement. It is by far one of the nicest Navy bases, or Navy operations. Some Navy bases did pretty good. Bear Island, where I was stationed, Admirals and Captain's Row. The residential housing was really nice. Most of the base wasn't, but where they lived, Newport, Rhode Island, again, where the captains and the admirals, it was pretty nice. But yeah, so in order to, this was not your normal radio or Navy base. There's an early picture. Still had the circular driveway there. You can see here, that was it's blocked off now, but that was the entrance into the radio room. And that whole first wing was ops, and then the apartments were surrounding it. Again, some early pictures of the construction. Again, this pretty unique for the Cypress over the winters. I can't remember what the name is, but anyway, it's cool. Terracotta roof on the top, and then again, it was an interior I-beam steel construction, which wasn't unusual at the time, but was not a standard construction technique at that time. So Atterbury actually was pretty forward-leaning when he built the building. There's the generator. There actually was, they brought power out when they opened the base in 35. But they needed the backup, so they brought the generator in, which was good, because even when I was here in 99, we would lose power out here, and the generator took care of it. Anyway, they brought it in, they opened it up. In the 1930s, Germany starts feeling their oats and things start getting a little frustration. Well, as it turned out, when they did the radio testing, they did it out of the scooter at the edge of the rocks. And that spot was just as good as Otter Cliffs. However, no offense to any National Park employees, even in 1935, they didn't let the Navy cut down any trees. So the radio reception, even just this little bit of distance up, was different. And they were not nearly as sensitive as it could have been. So, literally, I think it was December 7th or December 8th or December 9th, Lieutenant Max Gunn, who had been here as a chief and had come back after he got commissioned, he grabbed the Civilian Conservation Corps team that was working at the base of the peninsula, brought them up in a truck and said, I don't care who says what, cut down all these trees. And they did. And lo and behold, the radio reception of the base went back up to as good as Otter Cliffs. And until we took the antennas down, we kept the trees down too. You can see some of the reception antennas up here. And then the two main antennas, those are the towers. The antenna was strung between the two towers. Basically in front of the rock, spanning the rock. Oh, and one thing I did want to mention at the beginning of the brief, there are actually people in this audience that know some of this stuff much better than I do. So if I get stumped, I'll be calling on them, or they can laugh silently and go, "That's always what I get." But anyway. But yeah, just some of those pictures are just amazing to have this thing built, and then the antennas, and to me, it's just glorious. It's just unbelievable to be able the utility of the radio base and the glory of Schoodic. It's just a combination you can't beat. Again, before World War II started and the trees were still there. And that was when they built the ops building up at the top of the hill. It's at currently an education center for the park. And then we had it as our chapel in the ESO office. We had our library was up there also. And I always think it's neat that the back end of the Rockefeller building, if you hadn't taken a look at it, that's how it looks today. I wish I had a couple of those cars. So the Navy at Schoodic, it went through several iterations. You said there was a radio direction finding station from 35 to 44, it was a supplemental radio station, 44 to 50, a Navy radio station, 50 to 58, and then in the 50s, the Naval Security Group was started and assumed command of Winter Harbor, and they became what they call Naval Security Group Activity, Winter Harbor. Now, Naval Security Group Command was the signals intelligence arm of the U.S. Navy. Naval Security Group Command's job was to intercept signals of interest and try to find out what targets of interest were doing so that we could keep track. That may have looked like Russian bombers flying over the poles. Could have been Russian ships, Russian submarines, whatever. Vietnam War, what the Vietnamese were up to. So Naval Security Group, we did the direction finding, we did the intercept, we ran the linguists, we operated and invented some of the earliest computers, the analysis that the computers were able to do, and the Naval Security Group was the military support for the Navy to support the National Security Agency, which is is a DOD entity. Track through that. The operation continued throughout the war. The cryptologic officer designator, it became in 1948. What we call it, cryptologic technicians initially started out as communications technicians, and the Navy actually never admitted what they did. At least initially, it was always, you didn't even tell your spouse, your kids. You'd come home and basically, what'd you do at work today? Yeah. Went to lunch, came back, and I'm home. Again, we all had security clearances. We were all sworn upon death that we wouldn't tell anybody what we did. Because, again, when we're looking at prosecuting the Cold War, it was important that our enemies didn't know what we were doing. And that's some of the grievous injuries to America happened with guys like Walker, who sold crypto codes to the Russians and gave it to the Vietnamese. And the Vietnamese were basically intercepting most of our radio transmissions for the latter part of the war. Again, how many people died because the Vietnamese knew what we were doing. And it was all agreed. Walker was a sailor, and he sold us out. It just, again, mind-boggling that for money, what people will do. But anyway, as the Cold War went on, we became more and more important with our location. The accuracy of the base was proven. The DF operations were good here, but as technology got better, that we actually needed more space. So they got a couple 100-acre out in the town of Korea, which is just to the northeast of us here, on the Korean Peninsula, not to be confused with the other Korean Peninsula. And then that worked out well. It was basically a marsh, which for radio reception was perfect because the water helped reflect all the radio signals, and it worked out well. So they moved to a basic DF system in '51 and relocated it over there to Korea. And here's an overhead of the base back when we had it. So when we gave it to the park, there's an expression most of us have heard is a white elephant. Well, a lot of people don't know what actually where that came from. From what I understand, in India, a white elephant is the most sacred of animals. And over the thousands of years of Hindu tradition, they set up a specific code. If you have a white elephant, you must have solid gold thread blankets. You must have gold cups for their tusks. You must feed them this certain diet. You have to have 100 people taking care of it. So the expression white elephant is if you really didn't like your neighbor, you gave them a white elephant because it would bankrupt them. Or they'd have to put so much of their resources into taking care of that elephant that they wouldn't be able to afford warriors and war and stuff like that. So it was really kind of you couldn't refuse it because it's the most honored, but it was not anything that anybody wanted. And you see what we had here, so this is the barracks, chow hall, our supply warehouse, there's the housing still here, our admin building here, building 10, our fire department was here, the water tower, we had a really great gym up here. We're sitting up at the commissary, which was our grocery store. We had the gas station just across there, our public works, salt shed in the back, there's a ball field and all that back up here. This is, I believe, circa the late 1980s, when the base was at its peak. About 400 active duty sailors and about 140 civilians worked here and supported the base and the community. Some of the great pictures from back in the day. They still had, before global warming, it used to snow in Maine. Oh, wait, it still snows in Maine. I thought this was kind of cute, just the menu, Christmas menu in the galley. So, just 1957, the year I was born. But yeah, roast young turkey and kibble gravy, and the reality is that's probably the exact same menu of every Christmas I had for the 30 years I was in the Navy. And that was okay. I liked turkey. But again, it was just neat that this place existed and like that. That was our climb to the entrance of the base. It actually still exists. It's over the archives over the Canadian National Park. Personnel inspection here. They're behind the Rockefeller building. This was actually the ham radio shack on the base. And again, we had so many people that were interested in radio community work. But then they also volunteered and did ham radio. And a lot of them would talk to the ships out at sea and pass, called Mars grants back and forth. When I was on a destroyer in the Pacific, before the internet, email and all that, I would get, messages from my wife relayed through one of the ham radio operators, and then a base or a civilian hams. Again, the fog of Schoodic is kind of well known. A little bit of rain and drizzle, but again, it all just added to the nuances. The one on the left there is the old barracks. So the Scooter Commons, we called it the Scooter Club, and so that on the right was our chapel and library, and I think it had 2 classrooms. The same ladies or somewhere. One of our last, our last educational service officer.
That's leaded.
This was before gas went to $5.99. I was out in California in June and I paid $6.24.
Get out of California.
That's, I live in Maine because my family lives in Maine. And in the 60s, it came up, so we had the HFDF system, the bullseye, and then the system called Classic Wizard, which a lot of the audience here participated in. But it was electronic intelligence, an ELID system that was able to track the transmission of ships, airplanes, and that. There were stations all over the world, and satellite in order to pinpoint the accuracy, and that's where Winter Harbor, I mean, HFDF was important and provided a lot of things. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but the reality Wizard was a lot more accurate system to use in geolocating targets of interest. So the operation site, expansion in Korea, said in 1959, we were part of the bullseye. We should have tied it all up, tied in a DF system worldwide. And building 153 out in the center of the Korea site. You can still, you go on Google Maps and look at Korea, you can, the antenna's gone, but you can still see the footprint. Look at that in. That new bullseye Wizard, both systems operated from Korea, and this became the admin part of the base. So we bus, pick vans, run people out to the watch center out at Korea, bring them back, take them out there, if they're working mids or watches, we take out the galley, we run a van out with, their lunches or their dinners and that, because they weren't allowed to leave. But it worked out really well. I will admit, and a lot of people here knew me and worked with me when I was here, but when I showed up, I had spent my entire career in the Pacific. Bouncing between San Diego, San Francisco, Bremerton. I knew the Pacific really well. And I was up in the building 10 up in the admin office, just checking in, and somebody says, I'm going to Korea. I said, oh, great. Korea's a great place. I like Japan better, but Korea's not bad. And then an hour or two later, somebody goes, I'm going to Korea. Wow, this is an awful small base to be sending 2 people to Korea. And then the next morning, someone says, I'm going to Korea. There's got to be something else going on, because we had to send him, I quietly asked somebody, how long does it take to get to Korea? It wasn't the 12 plane rides in 26 hours. It was, you just go to, Park Blue Road and okay. But I will admit, I honestly, the first time I heard, I'm going to Korea, I was thinking it was with a K and not a C. Bullseye. Now, I will give this caveat. Everything I talk about, I pulled on open source, and I am not attesting to the validity of it or the truth of it. Like most of us in here, I have signed agreements with the U.S. government that I will not divulge any classified information that I know. And I haven't. Everything I pulled out of here, I found from open sources. Now, where they got it, I don't know. I'm also not attesting that it's right or wrong. But anyway, that's my caveat, whether it keeps me out of jail. Now, these are systems that are old and are no longer used. But anyway, so the FRD-10 was a circular disclosed arrays, the CDR, and that was the heart of the bullseye system. And they were all over the world. And of course, the Air Force being different, they had to third out. But they were unique, and there were sites all over the place. We were in partnership with the British and the Canadians. We had a site in Newfoundland. We had a site here. We had a site in Northwest Virginia. We had a site in Florida. San Diego, Skaggs Island in Sonoma, California, Marquette, Washington, up in British Columbia, up in Bassett, the Canadians had a site. We had a site at Fairbanks, Alaska. We had a site at Adak, Alaska. We had a site in Hawaii. We had a site in Guam. We had a site in Subic, or Clark Air Force Base. We had a site in northern Japan, Naval. We had a site in Okinawa. And all of these were tied in so that if somebody transmitted HF, we would try to DF. The Willen Weber, if you understand high frequency, put 230 days. Still broadcasts run, not as much, so it has come back. Seems to be some of the scanner technologies and things like that that actually make HF a lot more useful today than some that had been in the past. We were able to use it to identify interference sources. You know, somebody was broadcasting a commercial broadcast. We were able to actually help out the SEC and be able to identify somebody who was broadcasting our frequency they shouldn't have been broadcasting. They both had both ground wave and skywave. So like your cell phone, that's all skywave. HF is low enough that it actually can transmit right through the beginning, right in the upper layer of the ground, as well as bounce through the lower levels of the atmosphere, and also then carry it as a direction line of sight as well. And we used it to locate enemies. I mean, we really wanted to know when the Soviet bombers had been launched. We wanted to know when submarines left, you know, Murmansk and down in the northern ports of Russia, or Petropavlovsk, Vladivostok. If you don't know where somebody is, anything could be happening. Now, if you're able to track them when they left port, follow them all the way down to the North Atlantic, and follow them home, it gave military leadership warm fuzzies that they knew what the targets of interest were up to. And we tried for what we call the three-buried cross. Any old FDFers in here? Couple. But that's, you know, my first officer tour, I was the HFDF officer at Skaggs Island. So there we were, up here in Maine, and so Scotland taking a shot. We had Puerto Rico, all to the same frequency. It was actually recorded in a loop, so that if a target was interested, was identified, we tip it out to the net. Everybody else would look back to their minute or two loop and go, oh, yeah, that guy too, and be able to provide the line of sight, or the direction line. And then you would try to figure out with a major minor access how big that spot was. And instead of trying to find somebody in the big ocean, you might be able to get maybe 180 miles long and maybe 90 miles across to try to find somebody, which is still a big area, but a lot easier to find than somebody somewhere in the Atlantic. I think I can't get ahead of my brain because I get excited. But yeah, so Hawaii, Guam, Homestead, Imperial Beach, Southern San Diego, Marietta, Washington, the Canal Zone had one, Savannah Seca, Skaggs Island, Sugar Grove, West Virginia, Winter Harbor, Maine, Gander was in Newfoundland, and Nassau was in British Columbia, Bonnie, Wales, Edsel, Scotland, Keflavik, Iceland, Florida, Spain, Hansa, Japan, Anchorage, Adak, Azores, University. But anyway, the Navy and the Air Force and some Army elements built this net that was able to track targets of interest literally all over the world. And as you can see, it's a pretty big world. And we did a pretty good job. I think we did a most excellent job. But particularly when you look with our friendly, partners, the British, the Japanese, and the Canadians, we were able to utilize sites all over the world, where the Russians pretty much were stuck with the Soviet Union and Cuba. So their biggest DF site was in Havana, outside of Havana, in Cuba. But we had a lot better access to their signals and tracking them than they did for us, which was good. That's a Willen. And And that's why we called it an elephant cage. If you ever around, go by Korea, and took a look, it looked like an elephant. And it was tall, and it was big, and it was round. And that's, look it up from the east. So they had low band, high band, not getting too much technicalities in it, but the low band, the radius was 393 feet across that antenna from the low band side, 423 feet across from the high band side. It was a 2 to 30 bands. Actually, I'll talk about it in a second. Again, I like the diagram, but these are all the antenna reflecting elements that then reflected it back to the actual antennas on the outside of the ring. We had put wire down as a screen, filled it full of gravel, and built the antenna on top of that. So again, just to allow the maximum reflection of the received signal. And then set this switching. Okay, so the reflectors actually bounce the signals back to the actual antenna. Which, when I first learned about it, I thought, well, that's kind of fun. But no, then it made sense because they allowed you to get the better accuracy. And so then we had the ground screen there buried in the gravel. And it worked really well. And the Cold War the Soviet Union was using HF. So it worked out really well. And then UHF, the HF, well, that got more and more popular. Radars got more and more popular. And HFDF did HFDF. So they had to come up with a system that could prosecute the higher band signals. So they came up with classic WIZ. Now it was an E-link collector, so it wasn't necessarily, it did focus on some communication signals, but mostly on radars and items like that to identify. Again, there was the Soviet bomber flying. Didn't have nearly as many stations because it was tied in with a satellite collection system, so we just needed the ground stations to collect the information. So in Winter Harbor, Diego, Guam, ANAC, Edsel, that's the most big bunch of wizard that's been bounced around here. A lot of people here, 3 and 4 tours would come back, they'll come here, but you can see it, we'll come back here. But again, in order to support the system. Winter Harbor became a soft spot in many sailors' hearts because we had the school for wizard. So not only did people bounce back and forth because we were on the team operations site, everybody who went to wizard came here through the school. So whether it be to be an operator or a maintainer, they all came through Winter Harbor. So that was a big part of our mission. And up until almost just before we closed, in order to support the Wizard system, which was actually one of the reasons we closed is Wizard was transitioning to another system, and they were able to do it with even less ground stations, so we weren't needed anymore. And some, not very good pictures, but there might be some recognizable faces. 1978, 88. The classes that we had out in Korea. And yet, there weren't very many places that were beautiful to go to school at. I went to school in San Diego. It was nice. It wasn't a Schoodic place. And again, as I said, the advances in communications and relays, and this space was ideal. But in order for people to be here, we had a commissary, we had a grocery store here. We had an exchange, which was basically a small department store. We had a restaurant, the Galley, where we had to feed everybody. We actually had a club, which was another restaurant where people could go and have a drink after work. We had all of the housing, we had all of the infrastructure, we had a fire department, we had public works, for just about, I'm pretty sure since we opened in 35 until we closed in 2002, the Navy plowed the park road for the national park and never charged them. But we needed to get to work, so it was just in our best interest to do that. But again, we had all of that infrastructure to the tune of several $1 million a year. And if you could do it remotely someplace else, it just said when the bean counters counted, it just didn't come up with a place like, all the positive side, it did make fiscal fiscal sense to keep this base. So that was, in 1999, it was decided to close the base, and they said it was great. Again, it had a big impact. Winter Harbor Grammar School had 128 kids in 2000. It had 28 in 2002. Winter Harbor used to have a pizza store, used to have a video rental place, a couple other restaurants. 400 sailors and all of their family, 140 civilians left. It impacted Winter Harbor tremendously. One of the benefits, though, is a man by the name of Eugene Dixon, who has his summer house in Grindstone. He was born in his summer place, and his family's always supported Winter Harbor. He worked out with the Navy, and he set up a nonprofit that the Navy was able to turn the housing in Winter Harbor, which was not a profit, and they were able to sell the houses to the civilian community, and then were able to roll that money over into the town of Winter Harbor in order to make Navy closing a lot less painful for them. And then it was a good base for promotions too. We had 3 former commanding officers went up to make admirals. We had one executive officer went up to be admiral, and there's a guy named Rogers, maybe sitting in the back row.
He's a nod.
One, I always found it interesting that the National Security Agency, which was founded on signals intelligence, never had a Navy signal intelligence person run it. It was always an intel officer, because they wouldn't let the cryptologic officers get that high in rank. Now, Mike is the first 3-star cryptologic officer and the first 4-star cryptologic officer, the only cryptologic officer that we had. He also commanded Cyber Command, which is basically a combat wing of the DOD. So again, I think it's because he had me as his XO. I gave him that little bit of gutter, and some pain, you need to get out. But
Jim, you'll be glad to know it's exactly what I told the president when I interviewed for the job.
there you go. As I tell everybody, you got promoted 10 times. I got promoted 10 times. So, of course, 5 of mine were enlisted, but it's still 10 times. No, Mike was a great guy to work for, one of the best. And I think highlighting leadership roles and all that. Mike came to me one morning and said, "Hey, how come Stephen Smuckatelli can't get an ID card for his grandmother?" Good question, well asked. Deserves an answer. I have no idea. So I go ask the department head, how come Stephen Smuckatelli can't get an ID card for his grandmother? My grandmother lives in Indiana, and she's his dependent. There's a base there, and she can shop at the commissary, but she doesn't need an ID card. So the department head said, "I don't know." He goes, "Ask the division officer." The division officer says, "I don't know." So he goes, "Ask the chief." The chief goes, "I don't know." Go ask Stephen Smuckatelli. "Why did you complain to the CEO about your grandmother?" Smuckatelli, "I didn't." And then his face, reiterated the story back, his face got wide, his eyes got big, and he says, "The skipper was out on the watch floor at midnight, and we were just talking, and he asked me how I was, and I just stopped frustrated. How did Mike know that? Because he went out to the watch floor at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he went and talked to sailors instead of sitting in an office. And that is always the key to leadership, is being able to understand what's going on in the deck plate. And I said, I've known Mike since I got here in '99. I had the opportunity to work for him as a civilian later on. carried that leadership trait, whether it was a commander, a captain, or a rear admiral lower half, rear admiral upper half, vice admiral or full admiral. I do respect him. He taught me, in the 2 years I worked for him, he taught me a lot about leadership, and I'll always be grateful for that. And on that, pretty much done. That's our closing letter. He told us to batten down the hatches and close. Again, a great place to have worked, an even better place to have lived. My wife and I have said this is the friendliest place. 30 years in the Navy, this is the friendliest place we ever lived. And that's what, when we were able to retire, we came back. I got a house out of Kuzma Point Road. Mike comes back up here every summer. I just, that connection that a lot of us made to down East Maine, it's a great place, and I'm honored to be a resident here. I'm also extremely grateful that we were able to keep most of the base. You know, a lot of the other, Marquette, Washington is gone. I mean, gone. Skaggs Island is gone. Northwest Virginia, the Coast Guard and the SEALs use it for a little bit of training, but the actual operations site is gone. Homestead, gone, but after the hurricane. You can't blame bean counters for that. But most of the bases at NSGA, like how many, 36, 38 NSGAs around the world, most of them are not only closed, but most of them are gone. The fact that we can still come and look at the Rockefeller building, and I can tell people, well, this is a classroom now, but it used to be my bedroom. It just is a blessing. I will say one thing, and I will admit, even though I'm actually what I would refer to as a fleet sailor, I actually had four tours afloat. We had the transition ceremony because the Navy wouldn't admit that we were closing. So we closed Puerto Rico right before us, and Congress got upset. We didn't give you permission. Well, it was a small enough base and we didn't need congressional permission. But anyway, the Navy was very sensitive. Well, we didn't own Schoodic. The Park Service did. So we weren't closing the base. We were just transitioning the facility back to the park who owned the base. And they were adamant that we refer to it as the transition. So when we did, we went the transition. I mean, a lot of people here, we're here for it. But we transitioned it to the Park Service. We didn't close the base. We transitioned it. Anybody else at Cianze? Like, remember, was our CB. So they put up decorations for the closure. We had there. Governor King came in, was a guest speaker. For those of you who can read, they put up closure in the slides. C-L-O-S. Fortunately, the Admiral couldn't read flags. So I didn't get killed. But again, I actually always appreciated a sailor who can get one by and doing it well. And that was done well. And that's looking at the rearview mirror. So that's an indicator of the Navy base here at Schoodic. And again, far more greater experts than I are in this audience. But I cannot underemphasize the impact that the sailors had in their patriotic support of the Navy, of the country, and the winning of the Cold War, which in hindsight was one of the stupidest things we ever did. But there you go. We'd still focus on Russia. We wouldn't be in problems we are today. But anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking. And for those of you under 35, I can encourage you that the Navy still is a great concession. The retirement, not too bad. It allowed me to retire at 62 on a house across the street from the ocean. So, anyway, steer you to the recruiters later. Yes?
I have a question for you. When this radio station was first put in, was it top secret, or did people know what it was going to be doing, monitoring signals?
So, no. So when it was first built in 35, it had the DF function, but the DF back in the day hadn't gotten that sensitive yet. And in reality, a lot of us, we also did search and rescue. So any ship in the Atlantic that was in trouble would transmit SOS on HF, and we would try to get a line of bearing on them and tie them into the rest of the net. So there was a lot of stuff that we did. And even when we were here, this was never a secret base. It was kind of neat that we were hidden in plain sight in Acadia National Park. The gate was always there. It was always listed as Navy radio. And the fact you can't hide a wound with red denim in Korea. So no, it was never. I mean, there are other military bases. Area 51 is what comes to mind. But our secret bases. This base was secret. Now, the actual description of Bullseye and Wizard up until 10, 12 years ago was more sensitive if not classified. But now it's overcome by events. But yeah, so it wasn't a secret base. It just wasn't something we talked about.
So you knew that they were monitoring their signals and stuff. I mean, the Germans also these.
Oh, absolutely, because they were doing it to us. Yeah, yeah. We all the militaries did it to each other. So yeah, I mean, pretty much in the day, if you were on board ship and you were transmitting HF, you knew somebody was monitoring you, so you only did it as little as possible. But yeah, no, everybody knew everybody else was copying everything you were transmitting. Now, with cryptos and stuff like that, they may not have been able to actually read the messages, but that's the nice thing about DF. You don't care what they were saying. You just want to know where they were saying it from. Anyways, sorry.
Is there a roster anywhere of people who served here that somebody like me could look at?
Not that I know of. Whether the Navy Historical Society, not society, but the Navy historian has that information somewhere, I do not know. Unfortunately, the rosters were all what we called for official use only, so it wasn't classified, but it wasn't something you took home either. So now I'm sure nobody in this room has an old watch bill laying around in the bottom of a box. I might not have one. My wife's give me to throw away for 20 years. But it would all just be little Polaroid snapshots of a particular time. I personally do not know of anything other than the historian of the Navy that might have some type of comprehensive list. And I'm sure it's not a list. It would have to be 1,000 different pages in 1,000 different places. Any other questions?
Source for some of those names, you can go to who was the gentleman who was Navy lieutenant there, wrote the 2 volumes in the Winter Harbor?
David Phaneuf.
Yeah, so Dave Phaneuf.
That would be a source.
So there's Dave Phaneuf was enlisted and was an officer up here, and he put together a self-published 2-volume set of Winter Harbor, the Navy. In fact, a lot of the information I got from the brief I got out of that. But what he did, we had a monthly news magazine called The Acadian, and he went through the history of the Acadians. He had access to all the back copies, and the old editor, I forget her name. Anyway, between him and her, they put together a lot of the Acadians over the 30 or 40 years. And that has a lot of names in it, but again, it's a hard copy and it's not a list, it's just CTI or CTT2 Smith was promoted, or whatever, the softball team, won or something like that. But that Dave's book, and he unfortunately has passed on. But yeah, he did a really good job and a really good effort to put together all of that information in one place. Sorry.
Do you know why the Navy selected Winter Harbor for the Wizard schools? I mean, with all of the other sites that were closer to more urban areas in Winter Harbor, why here?
I know, I mean, some of the Wizard, you guys were almost at the beginning of getting ideas on why. My gut feeling is it was still a very sensitive system, and probably didn't want people running around downtown San Diego talking about classic Wizard. Does anybody know exactly why?
Yeah, I think there's two primary reasons. Number one, remember this was the only continental United States station.
Yeah.
Number two, by co-locating the schoolhouse with an operational site, you can actually get a really strong interaction. And you couldn't replicate that anywhere else unless you went to the Pacific or you sent you to Europe, and this was a lot cheaper.
Right.
Here, and you had infrastructure already. So you had a gallery, you had housing, you had support infrastructure, so it saved the Navy money.
Yeah. And that's good, because we know sailors, I used to love going to Subic and pulling in and going to my favorite bar, and the hostess would go, "We knew you were coming last week." I'm on a submarine that nobody knows our operational schedule. "Oh, we knew you were coming." So we'd always get down, but no, that Mike, I'd forgotten, yeah, that we were the only continental. So it makes sense. Plus, it's a long drive to Ellsworth. Go talk about everything. Any other questions? Yeah.
I've got questions, since we weren't here during that closure, and the Park Service took it over. The Park Service, their mission is to protect and preserve not only the natural, but the cultural and the historic stories that are here. Was there any transfer of talking about the rosters and the Acadian, and was there any transfer of that type of data over to the Park Service archives?
So there was a lot of information. Unfortunately, it's all hard copy that was given, and I think they're just now digitizing it, and I don't think Acadia, maybe after this summer, will have any hard copy left. But John Kelly's actually got some of it. But no, at the time, the park looked at this as a white elephant. They were not happy with us at all. That we were giving, they weren't. And we even, Senator Collins and Senator Snow passed a law that we couldn't take anything off the base that was bought with appropriated funds. So our fire trucks stayed here, all of our desk equipment, our computers, everything that we had all stayed here. And some of it got used responsibly, and some of it didn't. But again, they either had the staff or the money, and only had 3 years notice to plan for a base that they never expected to get back. I knew Paul Martell, who just recently passed. I knew him well. This wasn't on our horizon that you guys would close. You'd been there for 70
And remember, the Park Service didn't have the budget either. When the base closed, their budget did not increase. So that they could maintain this facility. So it's yours, but it's up to you to come up with the money to do it.
Right. And Collins and Snow did get him some cash, but I'm talking to Paul, and we spent about $2 million a year on infrastructure. He says, "I don't spend that on the rest of the park that covers hundreds of thousands of acres and 6 islands and MDI and everything else." So, yeah. Though I will admit, the Navy left this place in really good shape. We worked with the Maine Department of Environment, and they came in and drilled initially, I think, 4 test wells, just because they knew it was a Navy base. The Navy base is notorious for everything we dump into the ground and pollute. So they didn't find anything. Great! No, they're bureaucrats. We know it's there. So they drilled 20 wells, and they didn't find anything. Great! No, we know it's there. I think by the finally done, they did 100 160 wells between here and Korea. And one well found PCPs, and we had record of it. And we had a transformer blew just down the street from here, and it had a plume that we actually had mitigated, but not quite far enough. So we ended up having to dig like another 20 feet of dirt to get the PCB, contaminated soil out. But that, otherwise, this, I almost guarantee, was the cleanest Navy base ever. And we did respect the park, we did respect the trees, so I did find it interesting. We asked to cut down trees so we'd have a better view, and the park said no. And then right after the park took it over, they cut down all the trees. But there you go. Anyway, any other questions? Again, for those who are, we are having an NSGA reunion. It's the 20th anniversary of closure. So June 30th was the actual last day the base was open. Appreciated Nick allowed us. I have the flag. We flew on that day 20 years ago. We had a couple of shipmates. We came out and raised that flag up on the Schoodic there at Rockefeller. We flew that flag all day and brought it down just as a memory of what we were here. And as we've got the whole weekend planned. There's a dinner people have signed up for up at the club tonight, tomorrow night. If you want to come around and talk to a bunch of old sailors, but we'll be down at the ball field. We're having a bonfire, s'mores, whatever, talk, social gathering at 7 tomorrow night, and then at 1 o'clock there'll be a picnic down there at the ball field. We will have hot dogs and hamburgers, and we're asking people to bring side dishes or potato chips or drinks or something to share. Anybody's invited. If you are here for the reunion and you didn't stop by Rockefeller Building, I got plan of the days in here and some stuff from the Ellsworth Chamber of Commerce and maps and stuff like that. I promise there are no nuclear codes in these bags, so you can take them without the FBI searching them on your way up. Anyway, again, thanks for coming. I appreciate it.